clock has been stopped on Capitol Hill as Washington gives a chance to Russia's initiative on Syria.
I have therefore asked the leaders of Congress to postpone a vote to authorize the use of force while we pursue this diplomatic path.
Those members of Congress breathing a sigh of relief this September 11th. For now, they don't have to pick their druthers before a war-weary electorate. Here in Paris, where the president Wednesday convenes an inter-cabinet meeting on Syria, the focus is now on selling Moscow a plan at the UN. But it's also about taking stock after 2 weeks where both the French president and his U.S. counterpart exposed themselves to backlash from public opinion. Have Barack Obama and François Hollande saved face, democracy at work, or a sign of weakness, the debate we've been having? What does the soul-searching of the past 2 weeks in London, Paris and Washington do for the West's standing on national security crises yet to come? Today in the France 24 debate, Obama hits the pause button. With us to talk about it, Franco-Syrian photojournalist Amr Abed-Rabo. Welcome, sir. Also with a socialist member of the French Parliament, Axel Lemaire, who represents Northern Europe in Parliament for the French expatriates. Welcome back. Also with us, Ardavan Amir Aslani, attorney and political scientist, author of books.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being with us. And Gérald Olivier, columnist, editor at Atlantico.fr. Your next book is going to be on
John Kennedy.
John Kennedy.
It's good to be here.
For the 50th anniversary of his assassination.
Yes, exactly.
All right, that'll be published in French, I believe.
It's in French so far.
Okay. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter. Our hashtag is F24Debate. This Wednesday, we've learned that Russia's given Washington its plan for placing Syria's chemical weapons arsenal under international control. Foreign ministers from the two nations will talk Thursday in Geneva about it. Moscow already vocal about preconditions, though.
A Moscow maneuver that's postponed the threat of a US military strike in Syria. It was Russia that proposed the Syrian government put its chemical weapons under international control. Damascus agreed, even saying it would sign a treaty to prevent any future use. That gave President Obama some diplomatic breathing room.
My fellow Americans, it's too early to tell whether this offer will succeed. And any agreement must verify that the Assad regime keeps its commitments. But this initiative has the potential to remove the threat of chemical weapons without the use of force, particularly because Russia is one of Assad's strongest allies.
President Obama now wants a UN Security Council resolution forcing Bashar al-Assad to give up his chemical weapons and ultimately destroy them. For this, he's relying on Russia, which wants any question of US military intervention to be shelved.
All of this will only work if we hear that the American side and all those who support them will choose not to use force. It is difficult to force any country, be that Syria or any other state, to engage in unilateral disarmament if military action is on the horizon.
That's in sharp contrast with a draft resolution announced by France on Tuesday, which allows for military action if Damascus doesn't keep its promises within 15 days. It also blames the Assad regime for the chemical attack on the 21st of August, a charge rejected by the Syrian president and Moscow. Another stumbling block, France's insistence that the Security Council refers the 2.5-year conflict in Syria to the International Criminal Court. Convincing Russia and China to agree to a stronger resolution may be difficult. US Secretary of State John Kerry will begin the process on Thursday when he meets Russia's foreign minister.
Let me get first your reaction, Amr Abed-Rabo. You heard President Obama say there is, with the talks that are beginning with the Russians, the potential to remove chemical weapons without the use of force. You agree?
I agree. I mean, it looks like a very good solution, but on the other hand, the problem is not the chemical weapons. The problem is the Assad policy. The problem is the ignoring the revolution and the popular movement for now 30 months. The problem is shelling with airplanes, with Scud missiles, things like that. So we are just talking about a very tiny aspect of the problem. We're talking about chemical weapons. Okay, tomorrow all the chemical weapons can be hand out by Assad regime, but what about the rest?
What about the rest? The sequence of events, the way it's unfolded. The French president has had to go against the grain of public opinion in this country, which is squarely against any intervention. And the fact that there is this delay, is this a good news, or does it make it even harder if ever down the line the decision is made to strike?
France and President Hollande has always made it very clear that we would favor a diplomatic solution backed by the international community. So I think the news has to be welcome, but it shows that the threat of a military intervention, in my opinion, was successful in that it reopened some room for discussions and negotiations. And France already said that the draft resolution that was put forward yesterday could possibly be amended depending on the conclusions of the discussions with Russia in particular. So, in my view, this is positive. One may think that it's not enough, that it won't solve the civil war. In a way, it's not the purpose of the whole diplomatic process and the hypothesis of a military intervention. The legal base for it is the violation of international law and the violation of international treaties prohibiting the use of chemical weapons.
So when you're talking about listening to what you're saying, this is more than just hitting the pause button, isn't it? This is the end of the chance of the U.S. and France striking.
I don't see it that way, and that's not how President Hollande expresses it. What he says is that France is still very determined to sanction the Syrian regime should President Assad not abide by the obligations that would be contained in a resolution adopted by the Security Council of the UN. And the timing to do so is pretty short, 15 days. So I think the threat of an intervention is still very, very much present in France and in the United States. What I salute is the effort to bring up a political and diplomatic response to the crisis.
Gérard Olivier, do you agree?
Not necessarily, no. I think you're right. I think the strikes have been postponed, and they've been postponed indefinitely. Because what happens, it's a victory, the first question, it's a victory for Russia. It's probably a victory for Assad. And I believe they were dancing in the streets of Damas, which I see this as a pretty specific sign. It's a victory for Russia because Russia is back in the game, and it's their initiative that has changed the situation. It's a semi-victory for President Obama because it's a face savior in a way. It spares him a probably embarrassing defeat in Congress, but it also shows total confusion on the part of American diplomacy. And I'm thinking of people who don't follow this conflict from day on. They must be also totally confused because we really don't know what's happening. A couple of days ago, as late as Monday, Secretary of State Kerry was insisting that American credibility was on the line, that they had to lead punitive strikes against the Assad regime because of the 21st of August chemical attack. And today this is off the table. So then American credibility has no longer any value. So,
all right. The lead story in the New York Times, they're reporting this Wednesday that members on both sides of Capitol Hill offered a collective sigh of relief as they returned to work after President Obama let them off the hook for a vote on military action in Syria, postponing a political confrontation that no one in Washington wants to have.
Absolutely.
So it's not just it's obviously not just the president. It's both sides of the aisle. So is it the U.S. as a whole that's weakened?
Well, there is definitely a weakness on what line the U.S. government is following. The problem here is that the American people in their vast majority, I think it's 8 out of 10, maybe more, are against were against any strikes and are against any type of intervention, military intervention in Syria. And it's difficult to go against the will of 8 people out of 10, whether you're president or you're a congressperson. And that's exactly what they were facing. They were going to have to vote one way or another, and they knew no vote was going to be a good one. Republicans probably on the Rand Paul side, those were against any kind of interventions, were the only one feeling safe about their votes. The other ones weren't.
You mentioned Rand Paul. He reacted to Obama's speech, and the Republican senator from Kentucky, still, how should we put this, unconvinced.
There's no clearly defined mission in Syria, no clearly defined American interest. In fact, the Obama administration has specifically stated that no military solution exists. They have said that the war will be unbelievably small and limited. To me, that sounds like they are pre-announcing that the military strikes will not punish Assad personally or affect regime change.
All right, that's how he's putting it. And by the way, the Republican leadership in the House in favor of strikes. As for Barack Obama, he insisted in his speech that the strikes, albeit limited, would indeed punish Assad.
Let me make something clear. The United States military doesn't do pinpricks. Even a limited strike will send a message to Assad that no other nation can deliver. I don't think we should remove another dictator with force. We learned from Iraq that doing so makes us responsible for all that comes next. But a targeted strike can make Assad or any other dictator think twice before using chemical weapons.
How are those words playing in the Middle East?
As it was pointed out, I think that the US government is going through a huge loss of credibility. I mean, if we were supposed to put the rewind button and go back 10 days ago, the jingoistic speech coming out of the White House was awesome. I mean, you got the feeling that any moment the American Navy would launch those cruise missiles from the Mediterranean and annihilate Assad's military force. Every single day that went by, that threat was emaciated by the second. And at the end of the day, they were basically handing out to President Assad the military plan for the strikes. It will be symbolic. It will not entail any modification in the balance of powers in the civil war, because it is a civil war. It was a revolution, but it's a civil war today,
It's
unfortunately.
not a civil war. No, I'm sorry for that.
And they would have said, you're going to hit the presidential palace, target 2 Republican guards in Damascus, and maybe 2 airports, rapidly could be repaired, and you're back on track on the war. What's happened over here is that, and the Israelis are feeling it because they're very disappointed, the American teeth is no longer biting. And one country that was not mentioned over here, and it deserves to be mentioned, is Iran. Iran is Assad's main ally. And as a matter of fact, what is being pointed out today as the strategy that the Russians found, transferring the chemical arsenal from Syria to Russia, is exactly what's on the agenda for Iran in relation to the nuclear issue, transferring enriched uranium to Russia. I wouldn't be surprised if this idea came out of Tehran.
We'll talk more about Iran and all of this later, but further to Jean-Olivier's point, you know, obviously it's not just Barack Obama, it's both sides of the aisle. There isn't the stomach for this war.
There is no stomach because there is no clear target. And at the end of the day, the Americans are asking themselves, if we get rid of Assad, with whom are we going to end up? The odds on the ground, the facts on the ground, don't convey the message that we're going to end up with secular Democrats. What we're seeing on the ground and all the facts that comes out of the experts, and they're saying 70 to 80% of all those who are fighting the civil war are jihadists. So you want to get rid of Assad and create an Islamic Republic in Syria?
I don't know where you got this figure from. I'm sorry.
Everywhere.
No, not from everywhere.
Everywhere.
I just was a month ago in Syria, and 70 to 80%, we have to define what is a jihadist. But if it's what I think it is, there's maybe 1 to 2 out of 10. So it's exactly the contrary to the number
You've counted them, but what we've seen on television is liberating people. The other day we saw images of soldiers nearly on the ground being shot dead.
Yes, we're talking about
Everyone
10
is
people,
witnessing
yes.
the arrival of jihadists who don't even
Syrians.
speak Arabic, coming from Chechnya and Pakistan, God knows where, into the Malula village. It is beyond doubt that it's a civil war, and it is about the Assad regime against Sunni jihadist movements financed by the Saudis and the Qataris.
Again,
it's a fact
this is
questioned by no one.
It's a very limited and restricted.
Pure caricature.
So who are they
France was the
financing
first country to recognize the national opposition. And do you think that by letting down the democratic opposition, we will help to solve the situation in Syria?
Well, honestly speaking, I
They
can't
are
see the democratic
fed up
opposition over there.
of not being able to count on other countries to help them fight the regime. And then there will be in the future clearly a temptation to turn to those who can really help them with arms. So,
As a member of the Socialist Party who's currently leading France, talking about the morality of punishing people for the use of chemical weapons, may I just remind you, you were young then, between 81 and 88, when François Mitterrand, the first socialist president of the Fifth Republic, was in power, and we were witnessing the Iran-Iraq war, and nobody's questioning this unless you tell me the contrary, Saddam Hussein, with prior American and French knowledge, utilized chemical weapons, killing tens of thousands of Iranian soldiers, not even to mention 3,000 Kurds massacred, all of them civilians in Iraq and Halabja. Where was France?
we all know that.
Where
Let me
was
tell
France?
you my turn to tell
Where
you
were
something.
Why weren't you
We're
at that
in-
time
we're-
talking about getting involved and raising the red flag and going after Saddam Hussein? It's a double standard
We're
policy.
in 2013. Let me tell you one thing. In the 80s, I wasn't an elected MP. I believe in one idea, which is progress, and including progress of international law. And as an elected MP, I don't find it simply normal and moral to let hundreds of women and children be killed in their sleep and not do anything
Tens
about
of thousands is
it.
not a problem. Hundreds is a problem. And by the way, you're talking about progress of the law. The law hasn't changed for 7 decades.
You know, unfortunately, I was listening to this little discussion here. Unfortunately, we can't talk about progress here because there's a major problem in what happened. If you actually believe that no one should ever use chemical weapons again, even though they were at some time and it was tolerated, they were used a couple of weeks ago. And now the person who used them, if we assume it is the Assad regime, is off the hook once again, because there's not going to be any kind of punitive strike. It's like you're trying to take away a gun from somebody who's already shot it and say, okay, you won't shoot anybody again, but there's a couple of dead right there and you're not doing anything about them. And that's what's actually happening about this thing. So I don't think we can talk about progress. We can only talk about a certain form of confusion and great hesitations. Unfortunately,
The line
what
has
we have
been
here,
extremely
no,
consistent.
What we have here,
and the progress made within 10 days, when you look at how it was 10 days ago compared with
what
today.
we have here is a world without American leadership. And in a world without American leadership, you have conflict, and you have people ready to use whatever they have because they know that there's not going to be anything happening against them. So, and that's a new situation. And
All
it's
right,
a
we're going to
situation
pick
that's
up on this point when we
going to
come
last.
back because it's an important one. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.